This week we're looking at typography. For most of us, the first time we used Word or another word processing application, we just accept whatever the default was that for the type that came up. Or maybe we were doing a paper for school and the instructor specified that we needed to use Times New Roman 12-point doublespace with 1-inch margins, and we set that up and just went with it. We accept the default type for Messenger and for text messaging and for Facebook and so on because we don't really have a choice outside of the one type style that's available. If you treat your layout software, things like Illustrator, InDesign, and even Photoshop, like a glorified word processor, you're not taking full advantage of the full communicative and creative power of type. The best designers are experts in type and typesetting because they understand that well-styled type not only sets the document's tone, but it also directly impacts its readability, its legibility, which are two different things, and the visual hierarchy. Failure to follow your best typesetting practices as best is going to leave your audience with a negative impression, and at worst it's going to leave you with no audience whatsoever. So what is typography? It's the visual presentation of words within the design. We're going to be looking at the terminology or the vocabulary surrounding the usage of type. We need to look at how type is constructed, which is its anatomy. We want to take a look at how typefaces are classified, which are the different categories of type, and the function, or how it's used, the legibility versus the readability. Let's start with the terminology. First of all, we need to know the difference between a typeface versus a font. We use those terms interchangeably, and they're really not interchangeable. A font is a complete set of characters in a specific size and style. So a 12-point Helvetica regular is a font. 10-point Helvetica bold oblique. It includes all the letters and all the characters you get by using the Shift key. And there are some that you can use by using the Control or Command key with Option keys, and you can get some specialty items that way. A font family is also called a typeface, and it consists of all the variations in all the sizes. So everything from as small as you can go to as big as you can go, and it includes all the regulars and the bolds and the italics and the blacks and so on. There are tons of different styles of a typeface that are included in the font family. So we need to be correct when we're using the terminology. Are we talking about a typeface or a particular font? So typeface is the font family, and font refers to the same style and a particular size within the typeface. A glyph is a single character within the font. Glyphs are not just the upper and lowercase letters. There's glyphs for punctuation. So you've got exclamation points and question marks. And of course numbers. Then there's specialty characters like copyrights and the trademark symbol, or math functions or scientific functions. And some of them are just plain decorations. Most fonts average 265 different glyphs. Modern typefaces created using the OpenType format, which is created by Adobe working with Microsoft, are cross-platform, so you can use them in both Microsoft products as well as Apple products, and they can have as many as 65,000 glyphs within the single font family. These are going to include alternative letter designs and ornaments and other specialty characters. Now, does anybody know how the term lowercase and uppercase came from? Okay, so back in the day, Gutenberg is credited with inventing the movable type press. The original letters were made out of wood, and then they were made out of metal, and the metal ones lasted a lot longer. Type was sorted into cases, and the capital letters were used less, so they were kept in the top or upper case. Typesetters picked up each letter to place it in a holder, which was then placed within the press. Originally, type was cast using hot lead poured into carved molds. In the 1950s, we moved to cold type, which was created using photocomposition devices. These methods of printing started to be replaced with digital beginning in the 1980s. The methods have changed, but we still use typefaces that were created by designers like Gaudi and Caslin. The typeface or font family, remember, that includes all of the font styles and all of the sizes. So within a typeface, we're going to have this whole family of fonts. So like in Arial, the font would be Arial Regular 12 point, or Arial Italic 10 point, or Arial Bold 14 points. You need to be comfortable using the different terminologies. The typeface is Helvetica. The font itself is going to be, is it light, is it regular, oblique, bold, bold oblique, or any other number of variations. Another term that you need to understand is points. Points, picas, and how they relate to inches. Points and picas are measurements that are used within the printing industry and in typography. Now, why do we use this measurement? It's so that typesetters know how many letters or glyphs are going to be able to be placed in a line of type. Font length, that's how wide it is measured in number of characters per pica. An 11-point font like Helvetica may have a 2.4 CPP. So a 5-inch line of type, which is 30 picas, can have about 72 characters, including the spaces. We generally talk about picas for column or line width rather than inches because of the number of divisions we can get in there. It makes it very accurate. But it's a specialty item. We don't use it really outside of printing and working with type. So points, picas, and inches. So we have 1 inch. 1 inch is equal to 6 picas. So 6 picas to 1 inch. Okay, so we're using picas because we can get down to having a lot of divisions. Within a pica, so we're talking 1 pica, which is 1/6 of an inch, which is smaller than 1/4 of an inch, we can get down to 12 points within that pica. So we have 12 points here. There's a blow up. So you can get actually 72 points across 1 inch. That's a very tiny measurement, and that makes a very accurate measurement using a ruler. When we talk about a 10-point font, we are talking about the height of the letter. But you have to understand that not all 10-point fonts are created equal. Each one of these examples is the same size font, but they don't take up the same amount of real estate. In metal type, which is what we learned to base our sizes off of, the point size was the height of the slug that the letter was attached to. We measure from the top of the capital letter to the bottom of the lowest descender and give a small little buffer space underneath it, but a 10-point font is all based on this 10-point slug, even though the type itself may be smaller. So realize that there is a difference, and fonts do not all occupy the same amount of space on that slug. There are four main categories of font families. There is the serif, the sans serif, the script, and the decorative display font. So what exactly is a serif? Serif are those little feet that are on a character. The first letter forms created by the early Greeks are described today as being sans serif. Sans is a French word meaning without. Serif is from the Dutch word schrift meaning line. So letter forms were without lines. Letter forms were refined by the Romans, who found that their chiseled applications into stone monuments were made easier to work with by finishing the coarse ends of each stroke with a smaller perpendicular stroke. Serifs gave letters visual feet to stand on. They also provided a horizontal alignment for those feet, or we call it a baseline, for the words to run along. There are several styles of serif typefaces. Old-style typefaces mimic pen-based letter forms using strokes with a right-leaning inclination. Look at the slants on the serifs and look at the shapes of the letters. There's thick and thin parts to the letters, like you were using an old-fashioned calligraphy pen. No ballpoints, just an old dip-in-the-inkwell kind of pen. By the mid-18th century, typefaces were moving away from their calligraphic past towards designs that embraced printing technology. These typefaces, called transitional typefaces, were less concerned with mimicking the pen stroke, and instead the transitional typefaces were drawn with structured and consistent strokes in mind that they bridge the gap between the past and the next generation of more refined, stylized, and modern letter forms. Transitional typefaces do not have the right-leaning stress. The stress line is vertical. The angles on the serifs are not as pronounced, and sometimes they're rounded. There's even more contrast between the thick and thin parts of the strokes. Modern style developed in the late 18th century. The variation from thin to thick is much greater, and the serif is flattened out to a thin line. Modern fonts are best used for headlines, not for reading tons of pages in body copy. The ultra-thin serifs and the verticals in smaller sizes can make them difficult to read, and they're a very poor choice for web design. Slab serifs are also called Egyptian serifs. They were created in the mid-1840s when the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Mass production increased the need for more advertising, which in turn created the need for bold headline displays using slab serifs that stood out on the page. Slab serifs are typefaces that have thick rectangular finishes to their vertical strokes. There is no variation in the width of the stroke itself. Here you can see the differences between the different types.